All right, let's dive right into this explainer, the origins and mechanics of World War II. Today, we are exploring the incredibly complex geopolitical unraveling and really the massive technological shifts that triggered the absolute most destructive conflict in human history. We're looking at a war that dragged in nearly every country on Earth and fundamentally altered the entire trajectory of the 20th century.
Now, as a historian, this is one of the most profound questions you can ask. How on earth did the so-called war to end all wars, World War I, lead directly into an even deadlier global conflict barely 2 decades later? It's a dark irony, right? Well, to answer this, we really have to view the post-World War I era not as a lasting peace, but honestly as a very fragile, temporary truce.
You see, World War I radically altered the map of Europe. We're talking about the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires being completely dissolved. This created new nation-states, sure, but it also left behind some incredibly deep, unresolved tensions. Now, the international community tried to prevent future conflicts by establishing the League of Nations in 1920. The whole goal was collective security and peaceful arbitration. But despite a lot of strong pacifist sentiment globally, the League notoriously lacked its own armed forces to actually enforce any of its resolutions. So the peace settlements ended up laying the direct groundwork for massive future resentment.
To really understand the mechanics of that resentment, let's just look at the numbers. 13%. That is the exact chunk of home territory Germany lost under the Treaty of Versailles, along with literally all of its overseas possessions. And on top of that, the treaty imposed heavy financial reparations and severely limited the size of the German armed forces. Historically speaking, this highly punitive settlement acted as a massive catalyst. It fueled this intense revanchist nationalism, basically a really powerful desire to reclaim lost territory and national pride, which just simmered and boiled throughout the entire interwar period.
And this deep national frustration, it paved the way for some radical political shifts. Between 1922 and 1925, Benito Mussolini's fascist movement completely seized power in Italy, entirely abolishing representative democracy for a totalitarian agenda that promised a new Roman Empire. Then, in 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. The Nazi regime systematically dismantled parliamentary democracy from the inside out. They began a massive, totally defiant rearmament campaign and pursued an aggressively expansionist foreign policy designed to completely revise the world order.
But hey, the buildup to global conflict wasn't just isolated to Europe, right? It was a truly global phenomenon. Over in Asia, the Empire of Japan was adopting an increasingly militaristic posture. They were driven by a huge need for resources and a deeply held belief in their right to rule Asia. So, taking advantage of a fractured China that was totally embroiled in its own civil war, Japan actually staged the Mukden incident in 1931. They used this as a pretext to invade Manchuria and set up a puppet state. This clearly signaled their aggressive imperial ambitions way before the first shots were ever fired in the West.
And as we follow this timeline, you can really see this creeping, accelerating momentum toward war throughout the 1930s. As these powers tested the waters, the international response was, unfortunately, largely to appease them. When Germany annexed Austria and demanded the Sudetenland in 1938, Britain and France followed a strict policy of appeasement. They literally conceded territory in the Munich Agreement, hoping to just avoid another war. But by March 1939, when Germany marched right into the rest of Czechoslovakia, it became terrifyingly clear that appeasement was an absolute failure.
So, the breaking point finally arrived in September 1939. After staging false flag border incidents, Germany invaded Poland from the west. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. And then, shortly after, under the secret protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east. The whole country was encircled and partitioned. But, and this is crucial, despite the sheer military defeat, the Polish spirit was absolutely not broken. They never officially surrendered. Instead, they formed a government in exile, evacuating personnel to fight another day, while a clandestine state apparatus remained behind. Now, once the battle lines were actually drawn, the sheer scale of the mismatch was pretty staggering. The Allies, backed by their global colonies, held a massive 5-to-1 demographic and economic advantage over the Axis powers in 1938. To put that into perspective, the United States alone would eventually go on to produce about 2/3 of all Allied munitions. While Germany and Japan definitely had the initial advantage of surprise in those rapid attacks, they just weren't equipped for a long, protracted war. As the conflict evolved into a brutal war of attrition, this massive industrial and population advantage became absolutely decisive.
So you might be wondering, if the Allies had this massive demographic advantage, how are the Axis powers so wildly successful early on? Well, to understand that, we have to pivot from the political causes to the technological catalysts. The actual machinery of war had evolved at a terrifying speed. The traditional battlefield strategies that commanders had relied on for decades, they were about to be completely shattered. Enter Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. And this wasn't just some new weapon. It was an entirely new military doctrine. It relied on extreme high mobility, brilliantly integrating air support with concentrated, incredibly fast-moving armor to rapidly flank and just totally disorient the enemy. In 1940, these tactics allowed the German army to push right through the Ardennes forest in France. Now, the Allies mistakenly believed this region was so densely wooded it was a natural anti-tank barrier. Big mistake. The result was a devastatingly fast encirclement that forced that massive, famous evacuation at Dunkirk.
Think about the contrast here. It's stark. World War I was defined by these muddy, static trenches where artillery completely outmatched the speed of infantry and cavalry. It was literally a war of inches. World War II, on the other hand, was defined by terrifyingly fast, mechanized armor. The tank evolved from being just a slow, clunky infantry support vehicle into the absolute primary offensive weapon of land warfare. We saw constant, rapid advancements in speed, armor, and firepower acting as the spearhead of these rapid new assaults.
Warfare essentially expanded into three entirely different dimensions. Up in the air, strategic bombing was utilized to completely destroy industrial centers and crush civilian morale. Out at sea, the aircraft carrier decisively replaced the traditional battleship as the dominant naval vessel, which fundamentally shifted strategy across both the Pacific and the Atlantic. And then, behind closed doors, there was this intense shadow war of information. Both sides developed complex cipher machines, like the famously intricate German Enigma, while the Allies countered with groundbreaking cryptanalysis, like the British Ultra program.
Of course, the human cost of all these technological leaps and political ambitions was, frankly, staggering. We were talking between 60 and 75 million people dead. The aftermath left Europe completely devastated. Its global influence severely weakened, which, by the way, directly triggered the rapid decolonization of Africa and Asia. And to prevent a catastrophe like this from ever happening again, the United Nations was formed. Simultaneously, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged from the rubble, not as allies but as rival superpowers. This set the absolute stage for the Cold War. So, to wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. When you look at the permanent members of the UN Security Council today, or the lingering everyday realities of the nuclear age initiated by the Manhattan Project, you are looking directly at the remnants of World War II. How much of our modern world order is still just an echo of this specific local conflict? It's a profound reminder of why understanding this history is absolutely crucial for all of us. Thanks so much for exploring it with me today.